Hello everyone, Namaskara. Welcome back to our YouTube channel Psychology Patha. I'm your psychologist friend and teacher Shreya. So I'm pretty sure you would have come across intelligence tests or you would have read about it and you would have thought that how these things would have started, how these things came into prominence. So today we'll be talking about history of intelligence testing where we will see how intelligence tests have grown or have evolved throughout the years. So, without wasting any time, let's get started. And yes, before that, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do subscribe. As well as don't forget to hit the bell button to get further notification from our channel. So, let's get started. So, in the late 1800s, Sir Francis Galton. So, Sir Francis Galton was the founder of differential psychology. So, he published some of his works about human intelligence. So, this Sir Francis Galton was the one who was really fond of human intelligence. So, therefore, he, came up with some works regarding human intelligence and he proposed that intelligence was hereditary. So he said that intelligence is something that you get from your ancestors or your parents, and it could be tested by looking at how people performed in sensory motor skills. So basically, Sir Francis Galton said that intelligence was hereditary. Okay, that we got it from our ancestors. And this could be tested by looking at how people performed in their sensory motor tasks. So first, let us try to understand what is sensory motor tasks. So sensory motor tasks are those that involve brain receiving a message, then producing a response. For example, like when you are, when you go near the fire, your brain sends a signal that there's a fire, and your brain also sends the signal that it is very dangerous for you. So you go away from it because you know it is dangerous. So that's how Galton said that you can test intelligence through sensory motor skills. So Galton also liked to use statistics to explain the data he collected. See, basically he was the one who was very fascinated with use of numbers and statistics, and he started to collect data about it. Though his information did not always verify his beliefs. So basically, for example, he said that he thought that head shape and size were correlated with intelligence. So what he said was that the size and shape of your head determined your intelligence. But there was no data that supported this notion that the size of the head and shape of the head determined how intelligent the individual was. So he is Sir Francis Galton, who initially took interest in the testing of intelligence, and he was the one who came up with the notion that through sensory motor skills, you could determine the individual's intelligence as well as through size and shape of the head, though there was no backing for this data. So next we'll talk about Alfred Binet and the first IQ test. So Francis Galton showed the interest of testing intelligence where he came up with his own theories, he came up with his own notions, but it was not verified or it was not supported with enough scientific data. So next comes Alfred Binet and the first IQ test. So Alfred Binet was a French psychologist. Basically, he played a very important role of experimental psychology. So experimental psychology is where there is a lot of statistics involved, testing experiments are involved. So he played a very crucial role in development of experimental psychology. So Binet became really interested in Galton's attempts to measure mental processes, so much so that he abandoned his law career and set out to do the same. So, as we saw in the previous slide, that Galton was really interested to test individuals' intelligence. So, he came up with his own notions and attempts. So Alfred Binet, though he was a law student, okay, though he was a law student, he was so much fascinated with Galton's work that he left doing law. He abandoned his career as a lawyer or a student of law, and he started to study Galton's works to understand intelligence. So at the same time, what happened was when Alfred Binet was behind Francis Galton's studies, he was really curious to understand, and he left his career as law and he, jumped into this field of psychology. So at that time, the French government had laws requiring that all children should attend school. So what happened was at that time, French government came up with laws that required or said that all children should attend school. So it was really very important to find a way to identify the kids who would need extra help. Yes, of course, as we all know, every child's pace of learning, pace of understanding will not be the same. So therefore, identifying a kid who needs special help, this had to be done to help the kids progress. So in 1904, as a part of this effort, okay, the French government asked Binet to decide which students were likely to experience difficulty. So obviously the French government wanted somebody who could help them identify kids who were having these difficulty. So therefore they approached Alfred Binet because at that time already he was a very well-known psychologist. So therefore they approached him for the solution or to help them out with this. So what Binet did was Binet with his colleague Theodore Simon, so they started to develop questions for this purpose to identify children who need, extra help, who needed extra help. So they started to begin questions that focused on areas that were explicitly not taught in the classroom. See, attention, memory, problem solving skills, all these are something that you see in a classroom. Okay, so they work to determine which questions best predicted academic success. So they tried to change their questionnaire they came up with questionnaire where they did not just focus on attention, memory, and problem solving skills. They worked to determine which questions would predict academic success of the child. So based on that, they could identify whether the child needed help or not. So they came up with a test. Okay. So they came up with a test that included 30 questions. So, such as asking, one small example is such as asking about the difference between boredom and weariness. So, this became to be known as Binet's Siemens scale, and this was the first recognized IQ test. So the solid first recognized IQ test was given by Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon. So this test was developed to identify and help children who needed extra help in their academics. So this is Alfred Binet. So though they came up with this test to help children, but there was also limitations of this test. So what Binet said was he did not believe that psychometric test could be able to measure a single permanent and inborn intelligence of the individual. See, it is not possible for a intelligence test to measure a single and permanent level of intelligence because these tests were such that would fluctuate. So therefore, this psychometric test could not do that. Okay, and Binet insisted that, as we all know, intelligence is something that is very very complex and it is influenced by so many factors. It could be your environment, it could be your economic status, social status, and all that. And of course, would be constant changes in our lives over time. So, what he said was that they could compare the IQ scores only with children who had similar IQ. See, they could do this comparison of intelligence with only those children who had similar level of IQ, because as we saw here that there's lot of differences and intelligence in itself is very complex. There are so many factors that influences our intelligence and it keeps changing. So therefore, the IQ could be compared with, sorry, the scores or the intelligence could be compared with those children who had similar IQs. So next, Alfred Binet, came up with this test, first IQ test. So next, now we'll talk about Stanford Binet Intelligence Scale. So Stanford Binet Intelligence Scale was developed by Stanford University psychologist, that is Louis Terman. So Louis Terman is the one who took up the Binet's original test, okay, and he standardized this test using a sample of American participants. See, in any psychometric instrument or any psychometric test, standardization is really important. So therefore, he used this he took up this original test for standardizing it by using it on sample of American participants. Okay, and initially this was known as revised Stanford Binet scale. So Stanford Binet intelligence scale is where Louis Terman, who was a psychologist at Stanford University, took up this scale. He standardized it by using a sample of American participants, and initially it was called as Stanford Binet scale, but it is now known more commonly as the Stanford Binet intelligence scale that is used even today. So Stanford Binet test, it was first published in 1916, and it was adapted from the original test. In that, French terms, ideas were translated into English. So when Louis Thurman took up the original, Binet test, so he adapted it, according to the times. So from the original test in that French terms, and there were French terms, and those were translated into English. It also included new terms using using two scales of measurement versus one to provide a more accurate score. So basically, he used two scales of measurement versus one. That is, instead of using two scale of measurements, he used one to provide more and more accurate scores. See, what happens is when you take two scores, or when it is not standardized properly and you take two, it is very difficult to come to a conclusion. And yes, psychologists needed a test that could have only one scale and provided more accurate scores. So Stanford Binet intelligence test provided a single number known as IQ quotient, that is the IQ, to represent an individual score on the test. So even today, this method is used where the only single number is given is known as the IQ, intelligence quotient. So there is one number that is given that is considered as your IQ quotient, sorry, intelligence quotient. Okay, so this is to represent an individual score on the test. Okay, so this method was started by Louis Terman, which is used even today. So this is Stanford Binet intelligence scale. So basically, this is the categories that he gave for the test. Geniuses, those who are having an IQ score of over 140, very superior intelligence, children with that, people with that is between 120 to 139. Individuals who had superior scores was between 110 to 119. Those with average level of intelligence was between 90 to 109. Dull level of intelligence, that is around 80 to 89. Borderline deficiency is between 70 to 79. We are not supposed to use nowadays, especially in the recent times, we are not supposed to use moron and all that, but it was used during that time. Now we use terms like, borderline level of intelligence or borderline, learning problem and all that. So you cannot use words like moron. Moron was considered between 50 to 69. Imbecile is between 20 to 49. Idiot is between below 20. So basically these terms, we are not supposed to use it now. These words are replaced with more proper terms. So next we will talk about ARMA, alpha and beta tests. So what happened was, not just in adults or children, there was a time when World War started. So people needed intelligence tests, that could, help them to screen people who were capable for fighting the war and who are capable to join the army. So therefore, this test was used. This test was used. So here they were faced with tasks. Okay, so individuals who wanted to join army, they were faced with the task of screening. So army officials had a task of screening people who were capable of fighting the World War, as well as those who were strong enough to face the war. So, there were enormous number of recruits. Okay. In 1917, as a chair of the Committee on the Psychological Examination of Recruits, psychologist Robert Yerkes developed two IQ tests known as Army Alpha and Beta test. So, Robert Yerkes, who was the chair of the head of the Committee on the Psychological Examination of Recruits, he developed these two tests, that is Army Alpha and Beta, to recruit individuals in the army. So it was designed as a written test. Okay, it was designed as a written test, while the army beta was made up of pictures. So alpha was a written test, whereas beta was made up of pictures for recruits. So basically, beta was for those who were unable to speak English, and who were not able to read and write like that. So the beta was administered on them. So the test was administered to over 2 million soldiers during the First World War. So the goal of this test were to help the army determine which men were suited. So basically the main purpose was to choose the appropriate person for the army, so that he could do a better job in the war front, as well as hold up positions and should have leadership quality. So after the war also this test remained. Okay, so this test remained, and it was used on new immigrants. So basically, this was used to screen the new immigrants when they entered US. But this was considered to be very inaccurate, because Army Alpha and Beta was meant to examine personnels who were supposed to be fighting the war, or for the the person who wanted to get into army. But then later on it was used on new immigrants, so therefore it was considered to be very inaccurate and harmful. So this is Army Alpha intelligence scale. So as I told you before, that Army Alpha tests were all written, whereas Beta was pictures, something that was very oral. So next we will talk about Bachelor Intelligence Scale. So we saw how intelligence tests were used to recruit army personnel. Now we'll talk about Bachelor Intelligence Scale. So like being a American psychologist David Wechsler believed that intelligence involved different mental abilities. So intelligence is not something that is very specific to one thing. Okay, so it involved different mental abilities, but he was not happy with the limitations of the Stanford Binet test. So what happened was, Stanford Binet test had its own limitations, because It just gave one single score and said that this person's IQ is this, and he or she is considered as inferior, superior, average. So he was really not happy with it. So in 1955, he published his new intelligence test known as the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. So Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale was the first scale that was developed by David Wechsler in 1955. And later on, Wechsler developed two different tests specifically for use with children. So first he came up with adult intelligence scale, and now he came up with children, the children's scale. Wechsler developed two different tests specifically for use with children. Wechsler intelligence scale for children, that is WISC, and the Wechsler preschool and primary scale of intelligence. So he came up with two specific use for children. That is, one was Wechsler intelligence scale for children, and next is Wechsler preschool and primary scale of intelligence. So the adult version of the test has been revised since its original, publication, and it is now in fourth edition. That is, Bachelor Adult Intelligence Scale is in fourth edition. Actually, now it is not in fourth edition; it is already into the fifth edition. Later, sometime, I will talk about it in detail. So let us talk about the VAS 4, that is Bachelor Adult Intelligence Scale, the fourth edition. So here, rather than scoring based on chronological age and mental age, as we all saw in the initial phase that, to measure intelligence, chronological scale and mental age was considered. Chronological age and mental age was considered. The Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale is scored by comparing the test taker score to the scores of others in the same age group. So basically, here what determines is the test taker scores, how they have performed on the test, in the test, and these scores are considered within the age group of the same age group of the children. The average score is fixed, that is 100, with two-thirds lying in the normal range. It is somewhere between 85 and 150. So this score method has become the standard in intelligence. So, where the total score is taken from all the tests. Okay. So the test, the intelligence level is scored for each test and then the total score comes. Okay, this score method has become the standard in intelligence testing and is also used in modern revision of the Stanford Binet test. So the same method is also used on the Stanford Binet test. The Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale contains 10 subtests. It's a very nice experiment but little lengthy. So there are 10 subtests along with 5 supplemental tests and provides scores in four major areas of intelligence, that is verbal comprehension. Verbal comprehension is basically your reading and writing skills, how good you are with your verbal talking and all that. Perceptual reasoning is where how you're able to reason out the differences, similarities, and all that. Working memory is nothing but remembering numbers, remembering alphabets, all that comes there. Processing speed, that is, how well are you able to, you know, recollect, put an information or try to understand that particular information. So these are the four major areas. The main division is verbal and non-verbal. Okay, so they will add at the end of the test, they will add verbal and non-verbal scores, and then they will determine the IQ of the child, the IQ of the individual. So Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale 4 also provides two broad scores that can be used as a summary of overall intelligence. The full IQ score combines performance on all four indexes. Okay, index scores, while the general ability index is based on the six subtest scores. So as I told you that the scores, that overall scores can be used as summary. The full scores combines the performance on all four index. That is, the perceptual speed, perceptual speed, working memory, and all that. So based on that four indexes, while the general ability index is based on the six sub test scores, six subtest scores. So this is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. That is the edition 4. So now we will see how intelligence scales are used even today. As we all know, even today the scales are used. It is used in criminal defense application. So you'll be wondering how is this? So in criminal defense application, they use intelligence scale to understand whether the individual is able to justify his point or not. Because if his intelligence or IQ is very, very low, it becomes very difficult for the individual to you know um, defend for himself. That could create a problem. So therefore it is used in criminal defense application. Next is it is used with students to identify learning disability. If they have any other learning disability, to understand that the tests are used. Then to assess therapeutic impact. For example, if a child is going through CBT, these tests are used to understand. Or you give a intelligence test to a child, through the sessions, and later on to try to understand whether that tests have worked or the tasks have worked for the child or not. So these are some of the uses of IQ test. So I hope you liked our video. If you have liked our video, please do watch our videos, like, comment, so that we can improve upon our upcoming videos. Share and subscribe. Thank you. Until the next time, bye bye.